Live, this is the Crew Lounge, where knowledgeable people come to discuss railroading and model railroading topics. Pull up a chair and let's get started.
Oh, yeah. I was just kind of jamming out to the music there. And for some reason, I'm still hearing. I don't know if you guys are hearing that. It's not supposed to be doing that. So I'm going to assume you can hear me now. It's wonderful, this technology. I'm John, your host on the TSG Live Crew Lounge program, which is what you're watching right now. Today, we're going to talk about modular model railroading. What is it? Who does it? Why do you do it? All that kind of fun stuff. And to do this, I've asked a number of people to come in to discuss it with us, and I'll bring them in one at a time here. First on our stream is going to be Mark Granados. Hang in there, Mark. I'm going to bring in Steve Williams, also going to be on our panel today, and my friend Dave Falkenberg from my area, and Mark Watson, and finally, someone you've probably heard of before, Chris Palomares. And of course, I brought everybody in, and they're all out of order compared to what I thought they were going to be. We'll go in order of, as if we're reading here. So, Mark Granados, if you could introduce yourself, who you are, and what your involvement is with modular model railroading.
Well, good afternoon to everybody here. I'm Mark Granados, and my involvement in the modular aspect of model railroading goes back quite a ways. I engage in it on kind of an intermittent basis, but I've been in both a standard module club as well as what's known as a Fremo module club. And my particular expertise, I guess, if we can call it that, is going to be in something what I call Medicare module design. Many of us model railroaders have reached the demographic mark where we're pushing our, shall we say, upper limits. And unfortunately, with the infirmaries of those upper limits come along with it. So I hope to kind of discuss what I've done and the design considerations I've gone through in order to design a module. Very cool.
I guess we'll go to Steve next.
Okay, I'm Steve Williams, one of the ringleaders at Silicon Valley Fremo N with Dave and Eric back in the days when we got started, and behind getting our stuff arranged to be at shows here in the Bay Area. And my interest is making sure that the track runs correctly and that the controls control correctly so that you can run trains and have a good time. So
guess that makes it your turn, Chris.
I guess so. Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me on. My name is Christopher Palomares. Back in the mid-90s, I was a co-developer of the National Fremo standard. It didn't start that way, but it became that a little bit later on. And my involvement is, I'm just like one of the guys. I enjoy all aspects of just portable layouts that you can go meet new people and set up really interesting layouts.
All right. Mark Watson, your turn.
Hello, my name is Mark Watson. I've been model railroading for as long as I can remember. I got big into modular Fremo when I was going to college in San Francisco, and I met Steve and Dave with the Silicon Valley Fremo group. Came back to Nebraska and started a group here, and have been building modules ever since.
Very cool. Dave, welcome. Welcome back, I should say.
Hey, no problem. My name's Dave. I've been a model railroader since I'm pretty sure I was about 4 years old, which was a long time ago. I have always been into model trains. It's been an obsession that was only eclipsed by computers and technology shortly thereafter. But when I started working again out in the Valley, I realized I couldn't make electronics my hobby anymore. And programming computers was something I did for pay. And I got back into trains around 1996. Just as DCC was getting interesting, joined a club, and we were a modular club, which was 2 foot by 4 foot modules, following the NMRA standard. But we lost our lease about a year or two after I joined that club, and was completely hooked on operations and all sorts of craziness. Ran into Chris at the 2000 convention, the NMRA convention in San Jose. Got a chance to operate on the big HO Fremo layout. I had also amassed a ton of N-scale trains because I knew I wasn't moving to California from where I grew up. There was no basement, so I was going to be an N-scaler. And I ended up going fully square into rubber gauging and embracing it, and have the attention span of a gnat and the follow through of any sort of ADHD dog you might know. So I chase squirrels all the time, but I enjoy the hell out of the hobby because it's not work.
Okay, I guess that's pretty good. So here's a question, and I think that this is something that people watching may not know what modular. Some of the people watching may not know what modular railroading is. So I think a good way to start our discussion would be to just throw it out there to you guys and anybody. We're not going in any specific order here now that we've got our introductions out of the way. So what is modular model railroading, and why should I care about it if I'm a viewer? So anybody, feel free to go.
Well, as houses get smaller and more people find themselves in condominiums and apartments, it's a way to enjoy the hobby and build a piece of something bigger. You can build an actual location. You can get involved at the scenery level, electrical level, and some other things without having to invest in a gigantic layout. You have a little piece of one. So at its simplest level, I think that's about it. Tell me your guys' thoughts.
For me, one of the best things about being involved in a modular group is that we never build the same layout twice. Every time we show up, we've got a different set of building blocks to build with. We've got a different space to occupy. It's kind of hard to get the show organizers around the notion that we don't like rectangles and we don't like straight lines.
Dave brought up something really that I could relate to. I'm definitely kind of short attention span too. I get bored with a permanent setup layout, and I love learning how to operate the layout that we set up for that weekend all over again, because every time just having different stations and villages and things like that, different switching operations kind of staged in different locations on the layout kind of create a whole new sort of set of challenges.
Absolutely.
The other really cool thing about modular stuff is you actually, like a shelf layout, right? It's a contained thing. You don't end up having, I think all of us who've been in railroading for a long time had the dream of being the next Alan McClelland, right? And have or Laurel Joyner and his giant outbuilding and having a gigantic layout that you would never finish. Whereas a module, something that's 2 feet by 6 feet or 18 inches by 36 inches is something that you can go through all the layers of model railroading and get, bench work, track work, wiring, scenery, structures, detailing, everything. And then you can kind of move on to the next one and get better. If you get tired of it, you can redo it. It's not like you have a basement that you've walled yourself into.
I want to jump in for a second, guys, because sorry, Mark, do you want to go? Actually, you go. You're a panelist.
That's okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I would just call a module a self-contained section of a layout. It can be industry, a city. You can do switching standalone, or it can just be a simple, I call them in-betweeners, something that goes between point A and point B. And yeah, you can have it set up, or you can tear it down and store it. It doesn't have to be a permanent installation into a house or building. So it makes building a layout much more flexible and consumable.
I was just going to add that one of the other aspects of using a module form of a layout is that you can adjust it for whatever your situation may be. In specific, I'm thinking of, again, Medicare module design. You know, it's great. Fremo modules, for instance, I think have a standard height of 50 inches from the floor to the railhead. But if you end up in a wheelchair for some reason, you know what? You're not lost because you can lower the module itself as opposed to a permanent layout.
Something I wanted to say, and I don't know, you'll remember this, Chris. Last year at the National Train Show after the NMRA convention, we did a layout tour of the Fremo guys, the HO scale Fremo that was there.
Yeah.
And something that I was struck by was how good a lot of the modeling was on that layout. So just because you're on modules doesn't mean that you aren't a good modeler either. You know, just because it's a temporary setup. I was really impressed with a lot of the stuff that guys in that group were showing at that show. So that's something else I think people probably should consider. It's not like some one-off thing to be into modular model railroading. It's really dictated by your situation more than anything else, right?
You know, sometimes it's you may have like a large area to do a layout, but you just don't have necessarily the amount of man hours to complete a large layout, but you want to bring something to completion. A module will really allow you to focus that effort into, whatever square footage that you deem that you're going to build. And if you have, if you're a part of a group that has more people in it and they're all doing about the same thing, you're going to come to find that a large layout tends to get to completion quicker just because things are more evenly divided up by just the logistics of owning a module. You have like a begin and an end, and you got to just pay attention to everywhere in between, and that'll really allow you to kind of graduate, be able to look at things at more of a macro level, and you can get into some detail that maybe just wouldn't be possible or logical or plausible to execute on like a really large layout. So the opportunities are pretty vast as far as like kind of defining your objectives and being able to really get into what you want to do.
And the opportunity to get back together with the guys 5-6 times a year and see what we've all been up to, eggs us all on. So it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I really have missed it this year.
Yeah. And that's one of the really cool things about a modular group is you can get kind of nomadic about it and go way beyond your state lines, and you end up meeting new friends and just find people that you find yourselves having an instant camaraderie with. Like Dave, I met you over in 2000 in San Jose, and that was awesome to meet you that time. And Mark, I met you, I believe, up in Santa Rosa when the NorCal group was up there. So it just, you end up kind of interchanging more than just freight cars. You interchange with your ideas and just new techniques and things too. It's really awesome.
Okay. I'm going to say something because everyone's talking all at once here. Something else to consider, and I don't know. Oh, this is actually a question from our top secret associate producer here. She wants to know about transportation considerations. And I know, Dave, you were going to talk about that. So why don't you talk about Rule 0?
Yeah, I'm the Steve will laugh because I think
I actually wrote Rule 0.
Yeah. So when I first got into Fremo, and I drove a 2-seater convertible with no cargo capacity. and then I upgraded to a Mini Cooper. So what that meant is that my modules didn't really exist. So Steve, do you want to tell? You wrote Rule 0, right?
Yeah, Rule 0 says that if it can't get into your own transportation by your own power, it doesn't exist for the rest of us in the group.
Yeah.
I'm glad you added that for the rest of us part, because I was going to say I disagree with Rule 0, because I'm starting an HON3 layout and I'm going modular. I'm not really planning on taking it to any shows, so I'm not planning on transporting it. But yeah, but you mentioned for the rest of the group, so that's a good qualifier.
Yep.
I think you make a good point, Mark, that you can certainly do modules for a home layout, especially if you know that you're going to have to move someday. Like say you're renting a house, right? You don't want to have all your bench work attached to the studs of the room or whatever. So why not make a modular layout? Then next time when you have to move to your forever home or however you want to put it, it's easy to do, right?
Right. And
Well, if I
go ahead.
Well, I'll let you finish up on this conversation. I do have a couple of thoughts I would like to add.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't plan on bringing this to a show. I'm sure just because I have show experience and show contacts, I'll probably get coerced into bringing it to a show sometime in the future. But one of the points from earlier, talking about the quality of modeling, building in a modular format, you're breaking the constraints of following the walls of your house or some kind of rectangular benchwork. It allows you to plan a module around the track work rather than the track work around the framework or limitations you have. So I think that really allows you to make more realistic track work, scenery, and further on the operations. Just makes it incredible.
Yeah, I was going to add that one of the things you can do with a module railroad that you may not be able to do with a permanent layout is that you can store these things out of the way at your house when they're not in use. My intention is to hang my modules from my garage rafters in order to make sure that I have the maximum amount of space to be able to use. The other thing is that, yeah, you're right. You don't have to use modules for a modular organization or group. There are several people that I can think of off the top of my head that built their model railroads with the idea of modularity in mind. One of them is someone I'm sure Christopher's familiar with, is Ken Patterson of the What's Neat This Week in Model Railroad show. He's got his layout built in sections so that he can take a section out to his backyard and use it in his photography. Another person that comes to mind, and doggone, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but his railroad is the Cat Mountain in Santa Fe. And he specifically designs his layout in modules because he wants to be able to change things around, but not everything at once. So, those two aspects are another good reason to consider using a modular setup.
Yeah, that's David Barrow, I believe.
I think that's right. Transportation is always, we refer to it as battle damage because there's always some that happens both on the way to the show and then on the way home from the show. So that you start to, over the years, learn what will and won't survive and only model to that level of detail, or figure out ways to have those highly detailed things able to be removed from the module so that you can put them in a more secure transport than rattling around in the back of a U-Haul trailer.
Or don't build your module out of entirely 1-inch foam, something like that. Don't assume Gorilla Glue will last more than 8 years.
These sound like personal experiences, Dave.
They're not my personal experiences, but they're collective experiences.
Yeah, that's right. Don't put hand-built turnouts directly onto foam.
the the way the conversation is going actually makes me think of a question that I think is worth discussing, because we haven't really discussed what exactly, like Fremo, for example, there are specific standards, right? So maybe talk about that. Like, what are the standards? Like, I know the rule is whatever, it has to be on one end and it has to be on the other end and it has to be a certain height, but it can be anything else in between. That way people are allowed to be creative with it. Maybe talk about that a little bit so people have a little bit more info.
I have a photo you can pull up right now on my share that'll help kind of demystify this. In essence, Fremo is more of a linear design. In modular railroading, you have kind of two different sort of frameworks for modular railroading. You have one where you call a closed loop, where you try to form a circle. You get the ends that meet up. And then Fremo is kind of on the opposite side, where you don't try to do that. You just kind of have a linear design, and wherever it ends, and you don't try to connect the layout back over on itself. One of the aspects that's physically different from Fremo to maybe other modular standards is things are designed to be, rotated 180 degrees end for end. So one side you can be curving to the left, and then at another setup you can flip the module around and curve to the right. So in order to retain that, things are kind of split in the middle. And this example that you see on screen, you can kind of see where the center line of the track is the center of the module end. Fremo does something else where you kind of put the attention on the ends with the assumption that things are going to go all kinds of weird directions between the ends. And sometimes modules even have more than one end, or they'll just have a single end for like a reverse loop type situation. So modular railroading for Fremo is really whatever you can kind of imagine. You can really build. It goes back to, I guess, rule 0 is, well, what's your restrictions for transporting it? If you have a huge box truck, hey, you don't need to worry so much about internal module joints, and setup will be a matter of like unloading it and moving it inside, and you're good to go. Other situations, you might want to break it down so you can have room for more than just modules. You might want room for your trains too, and other people. So it just depends on how you want to get something from point A to point B. That's probably the first constraint, and then at the setup itself, the actual footprint of your module system will be the next thing to consider. For this, it was going back to kind of how the module's designed. Everything's kind of down the center on the module end. You can kind of see, in this case, this is a module that's curved. So in the middle, I have kind of a sweeping curve, and then it comes to another end where it qualifies again, track in the middle. The end member's 24 inches long, has electrical connections to kind of continue on to the other modules.
I'm interested in knowing, because I don't know I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it, and I'm sure one of you guys knows. So is Fremo N the same thing, just with a different size track, basically? It's
very, very similar. We got to take a little bit of advantage of the road rash that the HO guys had to go through getting started. So right off the bat, we adopted the Anderson power pole connectors, which are really just amazingly reliable and very quick to set up, and bulletproof. And fairly quickly, we tried for a short time having fitter rails at the ends of the modules like the HO guys do, but by the time of the 2011 National Convention, we had decided that was a good way to do surgery on our fingers, and we weren't going to do that anymore. And we've gone to butt joints, and it makes setting up at a show so fast. Right? You bring the two modules together, you line the track up, we use these vice grip welders clamps that are, most of us store them on a board that's exactly 2 faceplates wide. So they're all clamped on there. There's no fiddling with clamps. It's just, snap, snap, snap. And then the bus wires go together. We can get, 150, 200 feet of main line set up and running trains in under 2 hours, which is, a joy to behold when it happens.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. There's a question coming in from our live chat. If I could bring this up here, and feel free, anybody's welcome to take this if you know.
Yeah, T-Trak does have a very nice small size. Since it originated in Japan, the land of, I'm imagining someone sitting in a capsule hotel with their T-Trak module and their boxes and boxes of Kato, N scale trains. But it is a very convenient size. It is, T-Trak is the new hotness, right? In terms of, just as N-Trak was this crazy new standard that Jim Fitzgerald did back in the late 70s, I think the late 70s, early 80s, the T-Trak stuff has kind of lit up as Unitrack has, made it easier for folks.
I think Walters is putting out kits, aren't they? That are
Kato and Woodland Scenics.
Okay,
I think have collaborated on a foam kit for T-Trak. There are a ton of guys that sell laser cut plywood kits for building T-Trak, Fremo, and Fremo, even HO size stuff. I mean, you can get a big laser cutter or a big CNC. There are guys in Europe who do CNC module and frames as well. So you can get into a whole sub hobby of machinist woodworking stuff around all this stuff. I think one of the guys is kind of doing his laser cutting business on the side now, building things that he built for his Fremo stuff. And you can go, that's a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So,
well, too, with T-Trak, I think there's a great deal of intimidation with, building sturdy legs or an aspect of, extra wood construction where, hey, you can use sort of like a box cutter and some wood glue and just get one of the laser kits for a T-Trak module and have something together in an evening and start laying track on it right away. I mean, it's a quick entry point for a lot of people just wanting to explore more scenery aspects of the hobby. And, it really kind of gauges about what catches your fancy. If you want to just, hey, I want to build something and I want to build scenery. I think if carpentry is kind of intimidating, there's full on kits for all kinds of different modular standards, not just T-Trak. I think the NMRA has one too, but I totally encourage people to just bypass the carpentry side of things. Try to find a good kit that'll go together, maybe with the simplest amount of tools, and just experiment with it. Get to that stage of experimenting with scenery, track, electrical and stuff, because that'll only build your confidence. And then that exposure to that side of the hobby, you'll see what really interests you and, see where you want to go next.
I have a quick question. Sorry, Mark, do you want to say something? I heard you inhaling like you were about to.
Yeah, I was going to say on the question of size, it's true that T-Trak allows you to build something in a much smaller area. But on the flip side, that's if you're going to do round running. You can do an oval of T-Trak in about half the space of a dining table. But if you want to do like a point-to-point or maybe even a self-contained switching module, you could do a Fremo module even smaller than that, with the ability to then make it a huge Fremo at a show or something. So it kind of depends on what your focus is going to be with how you run trains. You know, if you just want to turn them on and watch them run, or do you want to spend the time switching back and forth, delivering freight, stuff like that.
You actually bring up a really good point, Mark, and that goes into a question that somebody asked earlier that I do want to get to. But before I do that, I just want to go back to you, Steve, because you mentioned about those connections, the connectors, and I know what you're talking about. They're those sort of elongated ones. I've seen them before, but can you talk about that real quick again so that people watching actually get that info? What's it called again? An Anderson?
It's Mark.
Or do you have one?
Take it away, Mark. He's got some handy right there.
It's an Anderson power pole, and I need another one to plug it in, but it's
right. They're predominantly used in like automotive, like stereo installations and things like that for power distribution.
Okay, Anderson power
pole. They didn't develop it with model trains in mind, but we've certainly made lots of use of it.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure because you kind of went over that sort of quickly, and there may be people going, "What did he say?" Right.
And the way that we do we run 2 buses underneath every module, one for the DCC track power and one for the accessories.
Right.
At all of our shows locally, we run DCC on the accessory bus also, but we set those 2 buses up with different connectors. The power bus has red connectors, and the 2 power poles are stacked on top of each other. And when you look into a module, the top connector is the left rail. So that, as Chris mentioned, when you flip the module around, everything flips around. You end up having to flip the orientation of that connector, but still the top hooded connector at every end of the module is the left rail, and then that just makes everything connect together appropriately. And then on the accessory, we call that the leftover rule. And the accessory bus, these power poles have little locking tabs on them. So once you place them next to each other and slide them together, you can drag a soldering iron across the plastic and weld them together so that they won't come apart. So you get this done get it arranged once right, and you never have to worry about it anymore at the show. But yeah,
Mark looks like the guy on the plane showing you how to do the seat belts.
Exactly. That's pretty much exactly what it is, right?
My camera's flipped, so I'm trying to do it in an area that I can see it. But
right. So it looks to me like you've got in your left hand, you have the hood on top. I think.
Yeah. Yep. Hood on top right here.
Yeah. The hood on top, hood on the bottom right there, and the metal connectors inside these things right up over each other and snap down on each other, and they're spring loaded, and they don't take an enormous amount of force to put together, but they don't come apart accidentally either. So they're terrific.
I like the idea of ease of use, right? Yep. It's hard to mess it up, right? I mean, how many times have you had someone plug the wrong thing in?
The only problem that we've ever really had is somebody accidentally at the end of a teardown of a show taking them apart. So we've started combating that, like I said, with the soldering iron. Just drag it through the plastic so that you mess up the connector body so that it can't come apart anymore. And then
like Steve mentioned, they're both color coded and orientation coded.
Right.
So an accessory bus, it's a different color than the main power bus, but it physically can't even connect to it the way it's oriented.
Right. Because we put the accessory bus together sideways, and we put the power bus top and bottom, so they don't even plug into each other.
It's really an idiot-proof design, which appeals to me a lot.
Yep.
So the other question that came up that I wanted to mention in the live chat here comes from our friend Bernard, and he's interested in having you guys talk a little bit about operations on modular layouts, because I know that's what you guys do. Well, a lot of guys do, because the Fremo group that I was looking at that Chris did the layout tour last year, that's what they were doing, and they were having a lot of fun because you're operating this massive, just gigantic layout. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Go, Chris.
Well, I kind of picked, since I'm particular to the Southern Pacific, in the early days over in San Luis Obispo, the thing that we generally followed was how they operated the coastline, and it was a system called direct traffic control. And it was a dispatching system that was articulated over a radio from a dispatcher to the train crew. And simply what it is, the right-of-way was converted into these little segments called blocks. And you would be given authority, your train would be given authority to proceed east or west. It comes from the original Transcontinental Railroad. You either were east or west. And what you would do is just follow the dispatcher's block authority that they would give this train. You can proceed up to this point. There's so many blocks. You can go into the siding and wait for another train. It tended to lend itself really well to Fremo, that system, because each module kind of had a physical block sort of appearance. So just logically, you can say, okay, this module to this other module, so many blocks down the way. You can just kind of count how many modules you got to go. And if there's a siding there, you go in the siding. And if there's not, then you just kind of wait till you get more blocks from the dispatcher. It was a kind of a simplified approach to what the actual prototype did, but it gave us like a way to get from trains in the yard to trains over to a switching district and do it kind of realistically. Adding another layer on top of that, we experimented with car cards, and car cards at that time were super, super simple. It was just, a card with the reporting marks of the freight card. And what you would do is just simply match them up to an envelope over at the switching district. So if an envelope had a yellow card with the same, reporting marks as sort of like this hopper or whatever, you would just match them up, and that's the spur you would move that car into. It got a little messy though. I didn't think the car cards worked out so well because they inevitably ended up on top of the layout. And, when you're dealing with a lot of small details, and now with even finer details on your freight cars and locomotives, it just created a lot more opportunity for damage. So kind of move things over to trying out, switch lists and other things, handwritten switch lists, computer generated switch lists. I don't think there's a wrong way to operate a modular layout. I think that, the challenges that you will face operating a modular layout is quite often, if you have like a pool of freight cars or a pool of locomotives, what's inevitably going to happen is someone needs to start packing up because, hey, I got lunch with some friends on Saturday, so part of your equipment that you would use in operation disappears from the layout. So kind of like having an ability to kind of adapt to, how things come onto the system and exit the system during the weekend. That's something that you'll need to be mindful of. And, also the amount of work that it takes to kind of set up a system, the less amount of work that it takes to stage cars on one side and get them to a switching district. I think it's going to be more time running your trains. And when you're dealing with like a weekend setup, there's definitely a finite amount of time that you get to deal with.
Yeah, that's certainly what we found. We Dave and I both wanted to be having fairly sophisticated operating sessions on our Fremo setup, but by the time you get in and get set up and get things running, and and then you're having to interact with the public at a public show, we've found that most of us don't have enough brain cells left by the end of a Saturday to be willing to actually think about operating on Sunday. So
I found it more often than not. A lot of people would get on the layout, and it's just like after all that work and getting things running and stuff, it's just like I just want to run a train.
Yeah, I tend to do a lot of switching on the layout when we set it up, but it's not very formal. There's no switch list. There's no dispatcher telling me when and where to go. Right. We did have a dispatcher when we had a very small setup, and we were mostly running with kids at the 2011 convention. That was me, because everybody else in the group was too busy moving projectors, and AV equipment around in the convention halls, and I couldn't run more than one train at a time. So I shanghaied every kid that came by and put a throttle in their hands. And so
I think you have to kind of differentiate between a public show versus an operations gathering. Even at permanent layouts, you run into the situation where you're not going to be able to carry out an operations session with the public there trying to put on a public show. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. And, I to think that probably the same thing applies just from listening to Steve and Dave talk to any kind of a modular setup as well. I have heard people specifically get together with their modules in order to set up an operations session. And that might be the better way to do it, as opposed to trying to do both at the same time.
And one of the railroad prototype modelers meet in La Habra, California. This is, I'd say, early 2000s sometime. We set up a layout that was, I'd say, 10 modules without a yard, without a balloon. It was just a stretch of track with some switching on it. And we put together a timetable. We put together right-of-way conditions, and we put together a switch list. And I'll tell you what, just those few modules, it took us all day, and we had a great time just actually moving cars kind of prototypically. And it was small, and there was no other kind of track interference going on. And the entire anticipation was to operate this layout realistically. Versus say like San Jose 2000 type layout where it was, there were a lot of mainline trains. I think that was more mainline train operation than it was kind of dial down switching. There was some dial down switching, but most of it was just train movements. And I mean, each layout kind of presents a different aspect of operation, and you can kind of hone in on it and kind of design the layout to better suit mainline operation. Hey guys, let's try out mainline operation, have a yard, have 2 yards on opposing ends of the layout with a bunch of sidings in between, and just try to get trains from point A to point B, So there's a lot of aspects and a lot of things, a lot of ways you can configure the layout to be better suited for one operation system than another,
One of the things that we've been experimenting with, especially at shows where setting up these complex switching assignments and operations takes time and I won't say privacy, but it kind of excludes yourself from the public. But we're drawing up, I'm experimenting drawing up track assignments by industry or by car type. You can see the green here. That's the main line. So anyone who just wants to run a mainline train can go through there, no problem. And then we have these other areas where it doesn't matter who, but feel free to switch a car in and out in that area based on the type that track is assigned. So that kind of gives you kind of like an open season on doing some switching without having to formalize it.
It almost sounds like you're developing a modular operation design. I don't know if that makes sense. Modular operations plan, I guess.
Yeah,
it looks like Steve is talking, but I don't hear anything. Can you guys hear Steve?
Sorry,
I don't
I've
hear
got a
him.
hardware mute button that I pressed into the desk when I leaned forward. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're good now.
Okay. When you have a layout that doesn't ever get set up the same way twice, it's tough to know what the plan. And our group is an anarchy. We do not plan the layout ahead of the show. We sometimes don't even know what modules are going to make it to the show until we are physically on the floor. And we've had modules show up as late as 15 minutes before opening time, and we've hauled 20 by 30 section of layout around the floor to make room for a module that arrives late. So that doesn't leave a lot of time for planning the operation scheme. So I'd like to get there, but we haven't managed to make that happen. But we do have a number of guys who started to learn, the joys of moving along the line slowly and switching out every available spotting track and kind of getting the flavor of, okay, the covered grain hoppers go over there and the coal cars go over there, and we're moving that way.
I think that RFID is going to really open up modular operation, and maybe Dave can weigh in on this too. But you have these little things that have like barcode readers and all that on the phone, and then also with RFID underneath the track, you can move these things anywhere in the layout. And if your software is good to be able to adapt to these changes, you'll be able to crank out switch lists just on the fly and adapt to some of the real world situations, like so and so's cars are no longer on the layout, so just kill a routine and take all those cars virtually off the layout and assign them to different car types, and off you go. So I think as we get into the technology side of things, that a lot of our wishes for operation will be answered as new software and new techniques and new things kind of get adapted over to modular railroading too.
Yeah, I think NFC or RFID is actually something that could be really cool, because it's actually not expensive. It's less expensive to put on a car than nice metal couplers and metal wheels. So, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure that out in terms of making it work for everybody in a way that makes sense and scales from, somebody's wanting to play versus somebody wants to simulate. I mean, the funny thing is the real railroad cars use RFID. There's literally cast into the base of every boxcar since the 80s or something. There's basically RFID tags in the side of the car. Once the ACI stuff didn't work, which was basically barcodes on the side of every car. So it's all been done by the real railroads.
You can take a lot of what the real railroads have done and apply them to scale roads to solve the exact same problem.
There's a guy who's been at the National Train Show who has a whole system that even dovetails into JAMRI. I don't remember what it's called right now, but he has a whole system. He's a retired IT guy who did inventory management. Seems to be making a lot of money on COVID and PPE tracking at the moment, but it's tracking precious cargo, right? It's what railroads did. So
there's another question that I thought was a good one, and you guys may have an opinion about this. John's wondering about, what the current state of modular railroading is. I mean, what are the main ones? I'm kind of curious about that too. Like what has come out of the garden of modular, as it were?
I think T-Trak is probably the latest. N-Trak it seems like it's kind of blossomed into one track, and Fremo N is just out on its own that can choose to go either way. Narrow gauge, there's options for narrow gauge modelers now. Proto 48. I mean, you can think of just about any scale and realize that there's probably some sort of modular incarnation for it. I know for a fact that Fremo kind of doesn't delineate any sort of scale. It's really just the size and gauge of the track at the end of the module that really defines what you can connect to. I think what's going to lay in the future for modular railroading is, here's a realization that houses are getting smaller. Family units are going to have less available space in like bedrooms and things. And, the modern family, how many times does it move in the course of, 10 years, 20 years or so? These are all kind of realizations that, kind of impact modular railroading moving forward. I think that, if there's any sort of hint of a future move, like you're not in your forever home or something like that, modular railroading is going to be more important in situations like that, because you can invest into building something and take it with you. You're not going to be tearing it down and literally throwing it out. You're going to be taking it to your next destination and further enjoying your process of exploring that scene, or expanding it. So I think in the modern world, modular railroading is going to become more prevalent.
That wouldn't surprise me. There was the second part to John's question, which has to do with adding tech to the layouts. Anybody wants to chime in on that one?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
Fremo has been kind of working with signaling for, I'd say, the past 20 years. We started developing, Greg Furman really put out something called the Modular System, MOSS, and it's just a suggested wiring format for detection. That detection can be leveraged into signaling. And right now, Fremo has done a lot with ABS. And the great thing about ABS, it's kind of like plug and play. And, a light turns red when a train is occupied in it, and then it's green and yellow down the way. There's no sort of central dispatcher. We don't need to inconvenience someone to have to play the role of dispatcher in an ABS system. But that doesn't mean that we're limited to it. It could definitely be leveraged into a CTC system, at least having the ability to detect, at the track level.
Just to clarify for people who are watching who don't know about signaling, ABS is the automatic block signaling, where you get a yellow if there's a train occupying the block 2 blocks ahead, and a green if there's nothing, and a red if there's something. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and actually it's in that one video that we did over at the National Train Show, John, on your channel.
I remember. Yeah, I remember that. Very cool.
Yeah, I did want to also.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did want to mention one other technological advancement that may eventually apply to modular systems, and that is the advent of the layout command control. I've been kind of following that. Basically, it's an alternate network system that's part of the layout that basically deals right now simply with the accessories on the layout itself. It actually is what they call a true self-arbitrating bus, something that DCC is not. And the idea was to offload a lot of the traffic that was going across the standard DCC bus off of that and onto the layout command control bus in order to do a lot of the controlling situations like switches, signaling, things like that. And the nice thing about it is the design of it is such that it actually self-identifies itself. In other words, if there's a turnout motor on the layout, when the LCC bus is powered up or that turnout is connected to it, it goes through a whole sequence to self-identify what it is to whatever the rest of the bus, essentially, so that it minimizes the amount of programming configuration that somebody's going to have to do in order to deal with that. Now, I don't know that anybody's implemented that on the modular aspect of it, but I have seen people doing that and using it on their home layouts. And to me, it looks like it's probably something that probably be worth adding to the ultimate standards for bus control for modular systems.
And you can look at LCC as a method for convergence too, for your different throttle architectures and stuff like that, which is really interstellar awesome for DCC. I mean, you can be running NCE at home, you can be running T-Traks at home, and the theory is that you can take those controllers, plug them in to a common bus, and you don't have to have multiple sets of throttles just to operate at different clubs or different groups or anything like that. It's just one ring to rule them all, pretty much. I think that could really leverage DCC and kind of bring it into a new age, to tell you honestly.
Yeah, I see that as kind of the next generation of essentially command control of a layout. Like I said, it's actually a true network bus design is what it is, and that it's a self-arbitrating bus. You don't have anything that's a master controller on it like DCC has. You have the ability to basically be able to plug and play the thing is what it comes down to. And I think that kind of lends itself to modular layout operation.
The better we get at plug and play, the more fun we have in the weekend. So yeah, yay, plug and play.
Absolutely. And the quicker you can get it out of the car and on its legs and hooked up, and then at the end of the day, put back in travel mode and back in the car, that leaves more hours in the day to play. So,
there's all sorts of crazy tips and tricks like building modules that stack together, how you pack them, how you unpack them. You could go on for a whole hour just on that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good idea for a video, John. I don't know.
Yeah.
How to stack modules?
Or even just building a module, right? Yeah. Building a T-Trak module, building a Fremo module.
I think a module design clinic type show would be great for 101 or something like that. Are you volunteering to? Well, I'm just asking.
Sure, it's fun to paint this fence, John.
I know you have to wash your hair that day, right?
Yeah.
Something I wanted to mention that I think is important, and I don't know how often you guys think about this or if groups of modular railroaders think about this, but generally, when I've seen modular railroads, they're at shows, they're at public events. And it seems to me like that makes everybody involved an ambassador to the public for model railroading. Is that something that you guys discuss or have top of mind awareness when you're interfacing with the public like that?
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that interaction with the crowd at a public show is
public and operate, so
hold on. We missed half of what you said.
It makes you more accessible.
Could you repeat that, Chris? I didn't hear. You guys, it was such a great question. You guys started talking at the same time, and wasn't working.
Sorry, no. I was just saying that just me personally, I like being on the public side of the layout. I think having the layout be sort of like the barrier between you and the people asking questions it just psychologically makes it tougher to feel invited into asking more and learning more. So I like operating kind of closer to the public, and then that opens up more dialogue.
That's exactly same for me, Chris. I spend at least half my time outside the barrier, and we don't put up a barrier around the layout. We let people get very close to it, and the interactions with the public are sometimes the best part of the show.
Yeah, same here. We when we first started, we had these barriers that we'd put up, and then I was always on the public side of the layout, and they were getting my way. So I no longer bring them to a show, just because I like to see the layout from all different perspectives. For Fremo layouts, especially, there's no backdrop, there's no forward, there's no backward. It's an all-around layout. And then another thing that I like to do is me and my father prefer these smaller shows because normally for one, they allow us to stay later and we can run trains after hours. But two, because there's less crowds there, I can hand the throttle over to people in the crowd more freely without having to worry about, keeping an eye on the layout from other people in the crowd. So yeah.
Have you guys had problems with that where, a kid comes up and starts grabbing stuff off the layout and stuff falls on the floor?
It's usually more a problem with the parents than with the kids. The inattentive parents than the kids themselves. So,
and that goes back to something Steve said earlier about building detail to the level that it can survive. Part of public showing, people are going to touch it. Every once in a while, someone's going to get knocked over. You just kind of live with it and regulate at what point do you say something versus just a kid's going to be curious. Me personally, I just don't like people leaning on the layout. You can touch it and fine, but yeah.
Yeah, I think also the fact that the Fremo standards require a 50-inch distance from the floor to the rail top probably pretty much precludes the littlest kids getting their hands in there, who are, they're most likely to be the ones that are going to do that because they don't know any better. And, I think other standard designs like the N-Track, I think theirs is, I don't know what their height is, but I'm pretty sure it's lower. They may have a little bit more of an issue with that. Yeah, they may have a little bit more issue with it. But again, I think Steve is right. It's mostly inattentive parents that are the ones that will, cause more issues than the kids themselves.
Some of my favorite times are when a youngster will come along and see me switching, and we mentioned that modules flip around, so all the turnout controls are on both sides of the module, and I'll enlist the youngster as the conductor, and we'll talk about what cars we're going to put where, and I'll teach him how to throw the switches. And I had one guy, one 12-year-old stay with me for over an hour as we pretty much moved every car on my module. So
That's really awesome, Steve. And my hat goes off to you for being that much of an ambassador. I have a thing with, youth in the hobby, and it's one of the focal points that I've kind of gotten into. So thanks for doing that. That's amazing. It's really cool. Somebody was asking about I'm sorry, Mark, did you want to chime in on that before we go to
I was going to say, I have a recollection of being at a modular show, and I think it might have been the NMR convention here in Sacramento, or not Sacramento, but San Jose a while back. And the fella had a throttle. It was a DCT throttle. It was modified such that he had essentially a kill switch on it for whatever train he was running. And what he would do is he would go around and, see some, wide-eyed kid looking at everything going and and he's all excited, and guy goes up and says, "Hey, looks pretty good, huh?" And the kid would, of course, nod his head yes, and he says, "Would you like to run it?" And of course that just, set the kid into cloud nine. But he had that kill switch connected to it. So he could let the kid run the train, but if he spun the knob too far or did something else or wasn't watching, he could kill the train to keep it from colliding with something. But the kid just had a ball. I was watching that for probably better part of 15 minutes, watching those two go around and do that. And I think something like that, it's everybody's, not everybody, but a lot of people talk about how we're not getting enough youth into the hobby. It's kind of a dying issue. I don't believe any of that, but I certainly think involving youth like that is probably the best way to combat something like that.
Mark, I honestly think that people that say there's not enough youth in the hobby haven't been to a Fremo layout. You might remember up there in Santa Rosa, we had a number of guys that were, teen somethings that I invited over to run trains. In fact, I was a teenager when I helped develop Fremo. I was 16, and I worked with Art Armstrong, and we co-developed Fremo together. So it was something that, at that time I really wanted to plug it into a different sort of level that was maybe more accessible to kids as well as, adults alike and everywhere in between,
Yeah, I do remember that. And yeah, I agree with what you're saying too.
Someone was asking on here, if you don't mind me switching gears, guys, is asking, how many modules do you guys have personally? I think it's kind of an interesting question. Like, how prolific are you in module building?
I'll go first. I have one main module that's 2 5-foot sections. It's 10 feet long that I keep adding more and more details to. I've got about a half dozen other utility modules that are smaller, that are, the track to go through to get from the detailed places to the next detailed place. And I'm pretty much at the limit of what I can store. So that's my limitation.
Yeah, I used to have more modules, but they lived at a friend of mine's house who lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So about 10 feet of modules went bye-bye this past fire season. However, I do still have an 18-inch by 24-inch signal module that's under construction. And I have a 12-inch by 42-inch carefully crafted module that fits in the back of my car, which is going to be a ferry slip. So I have made some decent progress on that.
I'll have to say that at the moment, I don't have any modules right now. Most of the ones that I've had before, I left back in the Santa Rosa area. What I will say is that I do have pieces of one. This is one that I'm going to prototype for my Medicare module design. And unfortunately, the pandemic has kind of shut everything down and basically cut off progress on that. So I've kind of set it aside, and there it lies in pieces waiting to be proven out.
Is that the one that you were showing me the pictures of the designs for, Mark?
Yes, that's it. Yes, okay. That's correct.
Well, maybe if you want to share those, maybe we still haven't heard from Mark yet, the other Mark.
Mark G or Mark W?
W's going to win. Mark W is going to win. Just a hint.
Yeah, no, I remember when you told me who he was, Dave, I was waiting for this. How many? 70, 67? What is it, Mark?
Yeah, I'm a bit insane. I've got 52 Fremo end modules, 59 Fremo end modules, with another 12 in progress. So that's 70. I've got 9 HON3 modules in the background here, and I'm building 9 more for a friend. So,
are they all in various stages of completion, or?
Most of my 59 Fremo N, they have at bare minimum base scenery. Most of them are 80 to 90% finished. HON3, all I have is the top coat. And then I'm building a new 12 module set, which is half going to be mine and half is commissioned for someone else. So
it sounds like you could be at the show all by yourself with your modules and have a massive layout.
Yes, you can.
Fremo, Nebraska is me and my father. So it is it.
That's a lot of building. Guess you by now you know what you're probably do in your sleep, huh?
It's funny. Until this last set of modules I built, this is the first time I've built a jig to build the modules. I built this module right here in 20 minutes.
Wow. Yeah, so I guess you get a little system going. It's very good. So I think, I guess you win, Mark. I guess that's it. It's the end of the show. Did you mention Chris? Yeah, did you go, Chris? I don't remember if you answered.
Well, my answer is I have 7 right now, and I'm at the point where I'm just trying to get to like have a garage again where I can set them up and work on them. What I've been doing is I've had kind of a run-in with a lot of historical type Fremos, some of the first that were ever constructed back in the 90s. So I've been kind of like, bringing them on sort of like little Bo Peep with sheep, just bringing them in. And my grand plan is to kind of preserve them and get them back to a point where we can use them in setups again and have them 100% compliant with everything that's going on now. So we can just set them up and kind of like even possibly do some of the original setup plans that we did back in the mid 90s and stuff. So I think it'd be kind of a retro Fremo type thing. So.
Retmo.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh man. Okay. Well, look, we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes. We have about 20 minutes remaining on our scheduled time, kind of like what I expected to have happen. And we've still have some questions coming in from the live chat. But I do know that, Chris, we talked earlier about the sort of the genesis of Fremo, and I was asking the question of where it came from, because I thought for some reason I had heard or remembered something that it came from Europe. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, you want to go down Fremo memory lane, huh?
Sure, why not?
Well, go ahead and pull up the share screen. I can talk about what's going on here.
There we go.
Fremo's really started from a European standard called Fremo, and Fremo wasn't really a standard. Fremo really stood for Friends European Modular Railroads out there. What I did is I saw this photo in Model Railroader. This was like in Club News back in '93 or so. And, when I saw it, I was just totally fascinated. This was nothing like any modular layout that I saw at that time. Everything that I saw till that point was a closed loop system. It was either an oval or an oval with a little bump on the side of it, turning it into an L or something along those lines. So I saw this, my world changed. And I brought it, I showed this photo to my friend Art Armstrong, who was kind of my mentor at the time. I was 16, he was in his 60s, but he was really helping me further my understanding and my abilities in the hobby. And he was just as enthusiastic about this as I was. What it shows is a yard, some linear running, some junctions. Things are just kind of messy and just thrown out there. And in the scope of just how someone would set up a layout, it's very operational oriented. You can see at the bottom left-hand side of this photo where there's a name of the sign. The sign is a station point where you can see and know, hey, I'm going to be running over to that direction of the layout. So it just, my world changed, and he and I started working on this thing called Fremo, which was definitely a derivative. There was no communication with Fremo at that point. This is before the internet. So everything that I put together was just based upon an observation at that point. And the San Luis Obispo Model Railroad Club, we were facing, we had a permanent location, semi-permanent, I should say, at the mall where we had our layout set up all the time, and people were just kind of getting burned out of going around in a circle. So they wanted something more. We had the ability to have the layout set up for a longer period of time. We could actually develop operation schemes and things like that. So we just needed to adapt the layout to fit the membership a little bit more and bring in something new. So what we ended up doing was developing, I think I showed this before, but it's essentially something revolutionary for the time in the mid 90s was, well, a module that could be flipped around 180 degrees. So you can take that one same curve module that goes one way and flip it around and go the other way. That made it so we can do a lot more different sort of setup plans and things like that. And then, having it so you didn't have to be regimented to 4 foot, 6 foot, or some sort of even derivative of. So the first layout looked kind of small, But at the same time, it was an L-shaped layout that it started off at a yard over here by 1 and 2. It went through a Y so you can turn your power. And it was double track. It went to single track. And at the bottom of the horseshoe here, it actually had a siding. And it had some sweeping scenery going into this reverse loop. And then you would go back and do it all over again. That was the first Fremo layout. That was over in Paso Robles in 1995. This is some of what it actually looked like from that first layout in Paso Robles from the state fair that we set up. And this was something that just people weren't expecting this from a modular layout. And we had, operations. We were working with like helpers, manned helpers at the time. This kind of gives you an overall look at the layout with the layout balloon at the top right there, the horseshoe that you saw on the track plan, that's in the foreground, with the yard kind of way back there by the caboose. This is also a double-headed shot. This kind of shows off some of the scenery that you can do when you are dealing with a single track. You can really accentuate the scenery to make the train seem like it's navigating track that was placed on the scenery, where the scenery plays more of an important role in the creation of the track features. And this actually started narrow gauge. I think this was probably one of the first narrow gauge instances. In the back, these tracks kind of towards the back of the module, those were actually narrow gauge, and it was supposed to be a logging camp. It got people thinking about narrow gauge and how it could be impacted by having a modular standard that was kind of free-formed. This photo's a little bit better overview, kind of showing more of the layout. And this was the first balloon that we built. This was just meant for turning trains on itself and running them back the other direction. Here's the yard. The yard that we used was actually from the traditional modular convention. I should really say the conventional modular standard. We had kind of like this big yard in the middle of the oval where people could have access on both sides, and then we'd set up the train and run it out, and then we'd run it back in and take down the train. The yard itself was never really meant to be a full yard where it was designed for operation of, switching out cars and making up and breaking up trains prototypically. It was just simply there to, store trains and run them out and bring them back in.
I have a quick question, Chris.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to really check this against, but it looks like this is lower than 50 inches.
Yes,
that
is true.
Was
the
50
first
inches
Fremo layout was actually at a 42-inch height. And that was due to the NMRA conventional modules at the time. The NMRA national specifications specify a lower track height than Fremo. Fremo is a little bit higher now, and that's just for ease of operation for most of the participants. So let's see here. Going back, this is on that other side with that logging camp. You might be able to actually see some of the narrow gauge track here. That was something that we were kind of flirting with back then, seeing how far we could throttle it. So it's really cool, Mark, that you're moving forward with narrow gauge Fremo right now.
I'm wondering about something there, Chris. When you had the modules that were incorporating the narrow gauge, was that just for a specific stretch of modules, and to maintain your modular standard, you had just the standard gauge at whatever it is on center at the end of each end of that? Or did you have some? Yeah, it is. Okay.
The narrow gauge at that time was just confined to that modular section. But having it and seeing it and holding it, it really got the wheels turning that Fremo could really positively affect modular railroading too. And it was something that we were going to go into and start actually physically building. But we just didn't get to that point at that time. The gentleman that actually owned that, Paul Deese, he ended up having a whole barn full of a layout, and his attention got redivided onto a permanent layout from his module. So it never really kind of progressed into all the different aspects that we were looking at doing. But it's great to see it going that way now.
Yeah, the reason I asked is because I remember from the show that we were at last year where you did that layout tour, that there were people that had multiple modules that was like their stretch. And those were multiple modules because they had to fit into a car or, some other trailer or whatever. Like I remember the one I'm thinking of right now, which goes along with the picture you're showing, was a huge yard that a father and son duo had. And I don't know if people are getting this, but as long as the end part of your collection conforms to the modular standard, it can be as big or as small as you want it to be. It could even theoretically go in different directions if you want it to. Like you could have a big T-shaped thing if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to this plan here. This was really a weird sort of footprint for putting a layout, and honestly, it forced Fremo to exist at this show because the conventional modular club didn't have the right modules to fit this space. So the only way that we could pull it off was by using our Fremo modules. So it was kind of necessitated, the first exhibition of Fremo, even though it was still kind of at a beta level of construction. But the layout that Dave might remember is this one. This is the San Jose National Train Show layout. So we went from this little one here to this gigantic one here. And this was what I would say the first incarnation of a multi-group setup where modules came from Arizona, they came from Southern California, Northern California, Central California, and they all worked together. It was pretty amazing. It was a huge layout. I think it was about 100 by 30 feet. Honestly, that size footprint is small compared to what we're doing now. But at the time, this was back in 2000, and things like this were just unheard of. And T-Trak, I believe they were doing multi-group setups for years and years. I'd say even decades, where T-Trak groups from all over the nation would come together and they would form, a big T-Trak layout. This was the first time that something like this was being done with HO.
Something I could say about Fremo that makes it I think maybe a little bit more attractive is that, for example, with T-Trak, you have, if I remember right, it's 3 lines that you have to run continuously throughout the layout. So you actually have 3 tracks that you're having to connect each module to the other modules. Whereas with Fremo, you have the one track that's 12 inches on center or whatever it is, the modular standard, which makes the setup, which actually Steve was talking about that earlier, how easy it is to set the thing up, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question. I don't want to get you off track with the trip down memory lane, but I'm kind of curious, Chris, and this is a question that came on the live chat too, which is, didn't the NMRA adopt the Fremo standards?
I don't believe so.
They didn't. Okay.
The NMRA was actually the relationship with the NMRA was more along the lines of a special interest group, where there would be like a Fremo special interest group, and the Fremo participants would be the arbiters of the actual standards. Because one of the things about Fremo that is better for worse, the standards do evolve. We want to keep up with the times. And one of the greatest, I'd say most recent changes was we changed the electrical plugs on the interfacing points of the modules. We went to the power poles as were demonstrated earlier in the show. We want to be able to keep up with the times. I think that, the technology that drives our modules, we want to be able to adapt and move forward and not be tied down to some legacy systems and legacy methods too, that might actually stifle the accepting and then the growth of the standard itself.
Right. Was that it for history, or is there more?
Yeah, that's pretty much it for history. I mean, there's a ton of photos of some of these other things, and maybe what we could do in the future, John, is I could put together a more concise presentation that kind of connects it from this point, starting in 2000 up to where things are at now.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. Maybe we should talk about that offline sometime.
Yeah.
Cool. Does anybody else have?
I don't know if I was gonna say, I don't know if I have the screen share ability, but I got some photos of the Fremo N layout from Salt Lake City. If you
you want to try sharing screen, and if I see it, there's a little thing that pops up on my screen as the meeting owner that I can add to our presentation if I see it pop up. But there also here we go. I see it starting to come on. Here we go. Oh wait, no, that's us. Oh, here we go. Does that look right?
So you have it in a different window, but
yeah,
are you able to see the schematic?
I took a video. I did do a quick little deal on the N-scale Fremo layout that was at the National. We can see it. So go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. So this is 100 by 80 feet. Let's see. We had 10 groups representing 8 states from California to Delaware. I think our count was like 220 individual module sections. And then, 49.7 scale miles of track. Let's see. Here's the setup. So it's pretty interesting there. Took a little indoor drone shot.
Yeah, just the size of that thing is just astounding. And thinking about being someone who builds this 4-foot or a series of 4-foot modules, being able to go to a show and operate on that is just mind-numbing.
Yeah.
I should say mind-blowing. Mind-numbing is something bad. That's a bad thing. Mind-blowing is good.
Yeah, I think this first one was So we had we had 1, 2, 3 stub, 4, 5. We had 5, 6 over here. Actual legs to the module. We had 1, 2, 3 interchanges, 4 interchanges. Well, this is kind of a storage yard here. Let's see. There's a yard there, a yard over here. 4 or 5 yards. Yeah. I say one of the quotes I like to say is, with Fremo, it's not model railroading, it's railroading. Because you have to, you gotta, this guy's, he stopped waiting for a train over here to clear. At a junction, you gotta have someone kind of, you visually dispatch yourself. But it's not just put a train on the track and let her go. You gotta dispatch yourself.
Yeah, very cool. All right. It looks like we lost Dave. Whoa. Yeah, there's only 5 of us now. I just got a message from Dave that he had a internet failure. So we're coming up to the end of our scheduled time too, actually. Does anybody else want to bring up another topic that we can go for a couple minutes? And last call for questions from the live audience.
I saw one from Dave Hammer about what kind of control the National Fremo uses as their standard. My thoughts on that I would respond by saying for now it's a LocoNet based system, but that could change in the future from what Mark was saying with LCC. It's one of those adaptabilities of Fremo of being able to sort of take the new technology and move forward with it.
Yeah, it looked like Steve was about to say something, but it didn't.
Yeah, I used the wrong mute button. Sorry. Our local group runs with an NCE command station, and all of our modules have cab bus in them, and it's completely neutral 6-wire, so you can run LocoNet on it, but we don't run LocoNet on it during our shows. And in fact, for most of our shows, we don't bother hooking it up. We all run with our iPhones or Android phones and use the Y throttle built into JMRI. That tends to work better at a public show than the individual branded radios.
Right.
When you really want to get a kid from the crowd interested, show off the proto throttle. Let them operate that.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I would think that people wouldn't bring proto throttles to that, but I mean, if you have one, why wouldn't you, right?
I mean, definitely keep it on you at all times, but
yeah, you don't want that walking off. What is that, $500 or something?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the kids adapt very, very handily to running a train from a phone, much more so than the grown-ups.
Yeah, I mean, kids always have phones in their hands anyway, right?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of other companies coming out with Wi-Fi throttles now. TCS was just introducing one of theirs, and I think Proto Throttle is another one of those throttles that are ones that are introduced. Are basically configured to work on the Wi-Fi, is what it is. And I think that's one consideration, that if you're going to create a group or have a group, it might be a good idea to incorporate a Wi-Fi connection so that people that have phones can operate on layout rather than having to go out and buy a specific throttle for a particular manufacturer.
Actually, I got a response for Seth on that one. You would need LCC for the signals too.
Yeah.
If you're going to run one, you might as well benefit from having the both, having some sort of legacy compatibility for, some guys, because not everybody's going to be at the latest tech, especially with DCC stuff. Just got to be able to provide the widest range of opportunities to enjoy running your trains. So, and also the signals are nice too.
Yeah. The ICLCC is the answer for how to get at the a more capable modular signaling system with means of incorporating CTC and ABS if you want, and all those different schemes, and not so much for the throttles themselves. There's plenty of ways to deal with controlling the locomotive itself, but.
I don't know if you guys notice, I'm trying to pop up the last couple of questions. Suddenly everybody wants to ask questions now that we're up to our time. You want to do these rapid fire and then we'll go? Does that sound okay?
Line them up.
Okay, well, here's the first one. Best source for standards. I guess to obtain the standards, anybody want to take that? I think I know the answer, but any of the experts want to take that one?
Short answer for that question is yes.
Right? It's just pick the modular standard you want and find the website that supports it, right?
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And somebody else was asking, which I thought was kind of an interesting question. I can't find it now. It has something to do with minimum radius.
Okay.
Is there a minimum radius?
In the N scale, for N scale, yes. Our standard calls for a 22-inch minimum radius on the main line. And number 6 turnout is our minimum standard off of the main line, although nobody makes those, pretty much. So that's the standard turnout in our setups is either an Atlas number 7 or a hand-built fast tracks. Right.
The same is true for HO scale. HO scale also has a minimum radius as well, and I think it's 44 inches, but I don't know. Chris might remember better than I do on that. The one thing about
it was 42. Sorry to interrupt you, Mark.
I thought it was 40, it's something like that. It's somewhere around 40 plus inches. And one of the things that I think we need to mention for Fremo standards anyway, and I'm pretty sure it's true for both the HO and N scale, is that the interface end of the module, if you have a curve going into it, you have to have a minimum stretch of straight track.
That's right.
Going into the end of the module interface there. And I believe for HO scale, it's 6 inches. Yeah. And I think for N scale, it's 3.
No, it's 4.
It's 4?
It's 4.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 4.
Yeah, it sounded like you were going to say something, Mark. W on the bottom.
Yeah, I was just going to add that there's minimum requirements and then there's recommended practices. With Fremo, 22 is the minimum allowed, but I will always highly encourage to build anything as big as possible, almost. For me, I don't do anything under 36-inch radius as a rule. And your trains are going to operate much more smoothly, better.
More better.
Yeah. Your passenger trains look better.
Yeah, they're going to look much better too. And with the straight track and the curve, you also want to make sure that you do an easement. One of the biggest things that makes trains toy-like is going into a curve with no easement. So that's another thing you want to consider. And these are kind of, general model railroading practices itself. But so there's, with Fremo N, we have in the standards, there's sections for, this is the standard by the rule, and then this is the recommended practice. So you always want to look for those and try to follow those whenever possible.
Right. Yeah, I want to add a qualification to that minimum radius number I gave you. That minimum radius number is for the main line track. Branch line tracks, that's a whole nother story. Generally speaking, it can be whatever the user wants. But for main lines on HO, I believe it's 40, 42, 44. And for N scale, the minimum main line radius is 22.
That's right. There has to be a way from module end to module end that involves no tighter than 22 inches and no turnout smaller than number 6. And preferably through the normal path of that turnout.
Well, I knew it was going to get technical at some point tonight here, guys. So I want to thank everybody on the panel, first and foremost. I really appreciate it. I mean, it really clears up a lot of the questions that I've had that I thought I knew the answers to. And luckily for me, I was right about most of what I was thinking. I don't know. Hopefully it gave the people watching some ideas. And I think it's a good option for anybody that's limited on space or doesn't want to get overwhelmed with the massive train layout room problem where you get your bench work belt and you go, oh my God, where am I going to start? So I think that
if you don't like carpentry and want to get to a point where you can build some scenery, find a group. There's carpentry guys in our group. There's electrical and track guys in our group. And some of us are not so good at the scenery, and we'll be happy to have you help us with that too. So,
yeah, that was another thing that I remembered from the Fremo group last year at the train show that I keep referring to, that I talked with Chris on a video about, and that was the level of help that people got. And they said that one of the reasons they wanted to be in a modular group was because they're not good at XYZ, but someone else is, and they will have them work on their module, and then they'll in turn do work that they're good at on the other guy's module, which I thought was a really cool idea, kind of a round robin idea, if you want to translate that to sort of in-home layouts, right? Where you have work nights and people come over to work on the stuff you're not so good at.
Yeah, you can share tribal knowledge.
Exactly. And one of the great things about that is you don't have to repeat mistakes, right? That other people have made. They can show you, oh, I did it that way and it doesn't work for this reason, So I think that there's a lot of positives there. So anyway, do want to, again, thank you guys. Anybody want to say one more thing before we go?
I guess one thing I would like to add is that, you don't have to do all the building yourself if you don't want to. There are plenty of other services out there online, and I think Mark W. alluded to that certainly, that will put a whole module together for you, anywhere from just the basic construction all the way to scenicking it. So,
Right.
You can get into this without necessarily thinking that your 10 thumbs won't allow you to build one.
Right. Lots of solutions. And I saw what you did there, Chris. I saw what you did there. Anyway, again, thank you so much. I'm going to drop each of you guys off the screen here one by one. Mark, thank you so much for your expertise and your comments. Greatly appreciated.
You're welcome.
Oh, I cut him off. Sorry about that. I'll catch up with you in a minute there, Mark. Steve, I'll make sure the next time, if we ever have a DCC lunch again, to say hello. And
All right.
thank you much.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Good
taking the time out of your schedule to come and talk with us today. Appreciate it. Oh, you're not going to say anything because I might cut you off.
No. Yeah, it's my pleasure, John. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you in person. Bye.
Thank you. And Chris, what can we say? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll have to catch up and see what's going on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thanks for the history lesson too. hang out backstage. We'll be right there. It looks like it's just us, Mark. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad to make your acquaintance. Hopefully next time, whenever there's shows again, if I see you, I'll come over and introduce myself. If you happen to see me, please introduce yourself, because I'm usually getting stopped by people at these things. So, but thank you much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Thank you. Thanks for everyone for watching.
Excellent. Thank you much. Hang out backstage. We'll be right back there. And one more thing here in the channel. Hold on 1 second. I'm clicking some stuff here. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. We went a little bit over time. Sorry about that. Hopefully you got the information that you need, and maybe modular railroading is a great option for you. I mean, it's really up for you to decide. And I think we have enough information here to at least get started. I'm going to populate the video description with some of the links to some of the things that these guys have provided to me off camera, and hopefully that'll help as well. I want to wish everybody the happiest of New Year's. 21 ought to be a little better than 20, hopefully. And I will see you on the podcast next weekend. So thanks again for watching.